Real estate words and terms with meanings and examples, part number 4. Cash flow, which means income from property after expenses. For example, the rental property generates positive cash flow monthly. Certificate of occupancy, which means official permission to use a building. For instance, the new home received its certificate of occupancy. Closing disclosure, which means a detailed list of final closing costs. For example, the buyers reviewed the closing disclosure before signing. Common area, which means shared spaces in a property or community. For instance, the pool and gym are common areas in the condo. Comparables, comps, which means similar properties used to estimate value. For example, the appraiser used recent comps to value the home. Contiguous, which means properties that touch each other. For instance, their lot is contiguous with the park. Conveyance, which means the transfer of property ownership. For example, the deed is the document of conveyance. Cooperative, co-op, which means a building owned by a corporation where residents own shares. For instance, buying a co-op means purchasing shares, not the unit. Counteroffer, which means a proposal made in response to an offer, altering terms. For example, the seller issued a counteroffer asking for more money. Covenant, which means a rule or restriction placed on property use. For instance, the neighborhood has covenants against commercial businesses. Debt-to-income ratio, which means the percentage of income used to pay debts. For example, lenders look for a debt-to-income ratio below 43%. Deed in lieu, which means a legal agreement where a borrower voluntarily transfers ownership of their property to the lender to satisfy a defaulted mortgage and avoid foreclosure proceedings. For instance, the borrower signed a deed in lieu after months of missed payments, allowing the lender to take back the home without going through a formal foreclosure. Default, which means failure to pay mortgage as agreed. For example, missing payments leads to mortgage default. Delinquency, which means failure to make a required payment on time, such as a mortgage, property taxes, or other financial obligations. For example, the homeowner became delinquent after missing 3 consecutive mortgage payments. Deposit, which means money put down to secure a property or contract. For example, the buyer paid a $10,000 deposit with the offer. Disclosures, which means information sellers must share about property condition. For instance, the seller disclosed past water damage. Downzoning, which means changing zoning to allow less intense use. For example, the area was downzoned from commercial to residential. Dual agency, which means one agent represents both buyer and seller. For instance, dual agency requires disclosure to all parties. Easement appurtenant, which means an easement benefiting a specific property. For example, the driveway easement was appurtenant to the lot. Eminent domain, which means government's right to take private property for public use. For instance, the highway project used eminent domain to acquire land. Encroachment, which means unauthorized intrusion onto another's property. For example, the neighbor's fence is an encroachment. Encumbrance, which means a claim or lien on a property that may affect ownership. For instance, the mortgage is an encumbrance on the title. Equity loan, which means a loan using the home's equity as collateral. For example, they took an equity loan to renovate their kitchen. Escalation clause, which means a contract clause increasing offer price if outbid. For instance, the buyer included an escalation clause in their offer. Eviction, which means legal process to remove a tenant. For example, the landlord filed for eviction due to unpaid rent.